Hi everyone and welcome back. I thought I would make a video all about variegation today, as variegation is a very hot topic. It's probably the most sought after aspect of a houseplant within the houseplant community, particularly if you get rare variegated plants. And I think it's a bit of a minefield because there are so many different types of variegation that can occur in your plants. I thought it would be helpful to publish some kind of information on this. And you might have to forgive the slightly clickbaity title because how to get variegation or how to make my houseplant variegated is such a commonly asked question. I thought, why not answer that question? And if you're asking that question, I'm afraid you can't just get to variegation. You can't just produce variegation in a non-variegated plant, unfortunately. However, there are many ways to get a variegated plant through propagation and division and all sorts of things. So let's just jump right into it before I start waffling away. So what actually is variegation? For anyone who doesn't know, variegation is the appearance of differently coloured zones in the leaf or the stem or both of a plant. It can be pretty much any colour, but typically it's your white or your yellow, sometimes your silver kind of splashes, or it might be sections, or it might be the edges of leaves. It's anything that's non-green essentially, or not your complete green solid leaf. Variegation actually occurs relatively rarely in nature. Typically, if we're talking tropical plants, it will be in the understory of the rainforest, so you won't necessarily find it high up. It's not necessarily clear why we have different variegation types. It can be for many reasons. It can be for better absorption of light and photosynthesis, or it can be to attract or repel certain insects, animals, creatures, people, etc. There's many different reasons, which there's like a minefield. Okay, so a lot of the variegation that you will see in your house plants is cultivated, and that also goes for garden plants as well. So variegation has been very popular over the last 40 years, 50 years, probably a long time more, because it breaks up the green. Otherwise you'd have just all green plants. So I don't think anyone can deny that variegation is interesting and very pretty. So there are several different types of variegation which will determine whether or not your plant will continue to grow variegated, or if you will only have one variegated leaf and the rest will be green, or if your variegation will differ between different leaves, or whether it will be exactly the same on each leaf. So before I waffle more, I need to stop this waffling. I'm just going to run you through the main types of variegation that you can get in your plants. So the first type of variegation is called chimeral variegation. This is a mutation, and it's basically where randomly within a plant there is a presence of two types of plant tissue. And that combination is what produces the variegation and the difference between the colours in your leaf. This is an unstable type of variegation. So an unstable type of variegation means that you are not necessarily going to get a plant that grows totally variegated. It might just be one leaf, it might just be a couple of leaves, and then it begins to grow green again, or whatever the original colour is. Unstable means it's not guaranteed. There are some ways to kind of encourage your plant to continue to grow variegated. So you can propagate your plant, making sure that you have a leaf node of the variegated section of the plant. So say for example you have a variegated monstera, and this is the Albo marginata, not the Thai constellation, because it's different. That's part of its genes. So you would have to chop a part of the monstera that has got variegation in the stem or the leaf in order to hopefully preserve that variegation. Although I think it's important to understand that you can never ever guarantee with these unstable plants that variegation will continue throughout the plant. Your best bet if your plant starts to revert back to green is to chop off anything that's reverting and chop it below the node of the last variegated leaf, and that should hopefully encourage your plant to continue to grow variegated. Again, not guaranteed, sadly. You can also propagate by air layering in order to hopefully preserve variegation, but you wouldn't be able to take leaf cuttings necessarily for a chimeral type variegation when it's just a mutation. And you wouldn't be able to do it from root or corm cuttings because the root does not hold those plant tissues that are created that generate the variegation. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't and I'll try and describe in the comments. So I have got an example of this, although this might be an example of a different type of variegation which I'll come on to next, just to keep it simple. So it's very hard to know whether this is due to mutation within this plant or within its genetics, but I hope you can see here that we have a little bit of variegation on this peace lily. Can you see that? Yep. So just down here we've got a little bit of splashy kind of variegation there. It's only on one leaf and hence very unlikely to continue throughout the plant, but it demonstrates the point very well. So the rest of the plant, as you can see, is not variegated. It's very much a green plant. So I think in all likelihood it is probably a chimeral variegation which has occurred within this plant, not within the genes. This one, it's possible it could be within the genes. So this is my variegated Alocasia zebrina. So have a look at that beautiful leaf. Isn't that stunning? So he's got yellow splashes all over his lovely leaf. And he does have another leaf of this plant that has got a little tiny, very almost unnoticeable little bit of splashing on the tip. I don't know if I hope you can see that. It's not particularly clear. You can't really see it in person either, but only sort of if you're really, really looking. But that does indicate that it might be a mutation within the genes of this plant, which I will get onto now. But basically, there is nothing that I can do with these two plants to encourage variegation. It will most likely drop out and continue as a standard Alocasia zebrina or a standard spathiphyllum, and that's okay. It's just part of the mutation and the beauty that makes up our lovely plants. But yes, so you know, those are not variegated cultivars, these are mutations. The other type of variegation that may have caused this is by transposons. I can't say this. Transposons. Transposons? Transposons. Transposons are genetic elements that can jump around the chromosome, and this occurs throughout life. It's not just in plant life. They're basically genetic elements that cause variations within the organism that they are creating. So I guess you could kind of relate it to a Roman nose that skips a generation, for example. It's within your genetic makeup, but it kind of jumps. It doesn't necessarily get passed on as a genetic trait every time, and doesn't necessarily produce that same result every time. So transposon variegation is usually seen as splashes, like you could see with my variegated Alocasia zebrina, rather than as sectoral or kind of dots or anything like that. It's usually splashes. This is because it's a genetic element, a genetic trait, it is inherited through seed. So if that was the case with my Alocasia zebrina or with my spathiphyllum, that it is caused by transposons, there is a very small chance that I could reproduce this variegation through seed. but without knowing whether it's caused by transposons or whether it's caused by chimeral variegation, aka mutation, then it's pretty much impossible to know whether or not I could reproduce that. The next type of variegation is reflective variegation, which once you know, then you can see it anywhere. So this type of variegation is due to the reflection of light from the leaf surface, and quite often that will be because of air trapped between the epidermis, the top epidermis, and the middle of the leaf. And these are usually silvery or white variegation marks. So some good examples would be Tradescantia zebrina, or I've got my trusty Scindapsus pictus here. So you can see here that we've got these silvery splashes, and although we can't see these air layers in between our leaves because they are so minute that you couldn't really see it with the human eye necessarily, that is caused by little bits of air trapped between the top and middle layers of the leaf, and therefore light reflects differently for those air pockets than it does for the rest of the leaf. So this is a great example of that. You've also got Pilea Moon Valley. No, not that one. It's the Pilea that's got the silvery bits on it. I know that's not that helpful. Reflective variegation is stable. It will be passed on throughout your plant. It is quite unlikely that you will get a leaf without any reflective variegation. It is a stable form of variegation. You can also get reflective variegation due to leaf hairs. So I'm not sure if I can show you easily. I'll see if I can show you. Can you see that this is slightly iridescent? It's not the clearest. I'll try with another one. Can you see that this plant is ever so slightly iridescent? We've just got a kind of sheen to it that changes the color as you look at it, just slightly. I mean, this would be much more clear if I did it with a light on it. I might add some in for that, and that's not a great example of variegation, but it's an example of difference in color of that plant. But for a lot of plants, the difference in colour is caused by the hairs on the top of the leaf, because obviously they reflect light in a different way. And begonias are a very common plant for that to be the case. We've also got pattern variegation. So that is a genetic trait of the cultivar, and it can be propagated by division or by seed, but that is generally the same type of variegation every time. So I just wanted to show you, Calathea is a good example of this. So Calathea is largely exactly the same pattern on every single leaf. And these are slightly different because they're young leaves, whereas this is a more mature leaf because the plant is bouncing back its health and getting older. Yes, this generally will always have exactly the same pattern on every single leaf, which is pretty cool because you can buy your plant safe in the knowledge that it will always have the same pattern throughout. So under the bracket of pattern variegation, we also have got what's known as pigmentary variegation. So this is usually inherited and is a genetic part of the plant. And it's not necessarily variegation in itself, it's that your leaf surface has got a different pigment over the green pigment. So it's masking a green pigment by another pigment. Often that will be Anthoanthocyanins, which are reddish or purplish in appearance once they are running over the top of the green. So here is my little example. So this is the Strobilanthes Persian shield plant, and I'm just trying to get the light out of there for you. So this is my Strobilanthes, aka Persian shield, and it has got purple pigment, or rather reddish pigment, over the top of its green pigment, which is what causes that lovely purple colour. It's just absolutely gorgeous. But that is an example of pattern variegation. I think it's quite likely, I haven't looked this up, but I think it's quite likely that the variegation itself is caused by air bubbles and under the leaf surface, and the purple pigmentation is a result of having a pigment over the top of that air layer. But don't quote me on that because I'm not 100% sure. So yeah, that's pigmentary variegation. And finally, we have pathogen infection variegation. So basically, there are a good handful of viruses out there that can cause actual variegation. Examples of this include mosaic virus. There's a certain host virus that's going around, and colour break virus. It is an unstable variegation because obviously it's caused by an external pathogen and you don't want that on your plants. Mosaic virus, I know there is no cure, you pretty much have to throw your plant out, but I believe that some of them can be treated. I'm not 100% sure on that, but by nature it's not a stable variegation, as if you were to get rid of the pathogen, you would no longer have variegation on your further growth. I don't have anything with mosaic virus or any other of the viruses, but I thought it was an interesting time to kind of show you that leaf discoloration from a pest is also considered variegation. And this is also, this is kind of a double whammy. So this plant has mutation. I think this is very likely to be transposon mutation, as it continues to grow a lot of leaves with this missing pigment. So I think it's probably genetic rather than a mutation. Again, impossible to know, could just be a chimeral variegation. Can't say that. But you can see on here, it looks very sickly. Many of you will be familiar with this appearance. This has been well and truly beasted by spider mites. So you can see it's got this kind of yellow discoloration. A lot of it looks almost like the green pigment's kind of fallen out. It just looks like a sickly plant. But you know, as this is colour variation in this plant, it technically is variegation. So I just thought that was interesting to point out. And again, that's not stable, because if you get rid of your pest, then your variegation issue is gone. So yeah, just thought this was an interesting one to point out. I don't believe we have an active infestation of spider mites, although I am treating him pretty much daily at this point. So I am being a bit careful not to show any of my other plants to him. I thought it was probably interesting to point out that a lot of the plants that you buy in the shop will be a cultivar of a non-variegated species of plant, and that means that that plant does not have stable variegation. A lot of that you can see in Hoya. So a good example would be Hoya carnosa. There are a lot of variegated cultivars, but they can very easily revert back to a non-variegated state. This is the Hoya kerrii variegated, and this is a non-stable variegation. It has been cultivated. It's not a genetic mutation. It's cultivated from a plant that has a chimeral variegation. So with these types of plants, you always have to watch out for your plant reverting. And if it does, you snip, snip. So yeah, and you can see in this, one of the differences between this and pattern variegation, which is a type of genetic variegation, is that the variegation is slightly different on each leaf. It doesn't occur in perfect replication of the other leaves, so it appears differently, which is obviously lovely, but also a good indication that it's not necessarily stable. Not always the case, but take my words with a pinch of salt. And I guess this is just one that I want to show you. This is my Philodendron Brazil, which is a cultivar. It is not a plant that naturally occurs in the wild, and you can tell because it has started to revert to a single colour leaf. I've got a couple of cuttings in here, which is why some of them are still growing as they should be. But this particular cutting has only got kind of lime green leaves, which is really interesting because I actually thought that the dark green was the cultivated part, but this one also hasn't been watered perhaps as it should. Sorry, I didn't mean it. But yeah, just for interest. I thought I would briefly tell you a little bit about the nomenclature, which is how these plants are named when you're talking specifically about the formal naming convention of these plants, not the common names and not the made-up names of nurseries and plant breeders. So the proper Latin nomenclature of a variegation that occurs naturally in the wild, so a genetic variegation, is prefaced by the Latin name of that plant, and at the end you have in italics variegata. So that means that that species is found in the wild with variegation. However, this does get misused, it gets communicated incorrectly on social media between plant enthusiasts, between all sorts of people, so that's kind of not an easy thing to take as given. It's not necessarily the case. Second, if you have your Latin name and then you have in apostrophes, not italics, variegata, then that means that that is a cultivar, that is something that has been bred to have that variegation. So that's not naturally occurring in the wild and much less likely to be stable. But again, just take that with a pinch of salt. There is also another part to this, so some may be named to indicate the area of the leaf that shows as variegated, or the zone. So for example, something that has albo marginata after it, that can still be a formal Latin name of a species found in the wild. Finally, I thought I would do a couple of FAQs just to make this straightforward, if any of this waffle has not been clear. Can I make my non-variegated houseplant variegated? No, you can't. Unfortunately, there is no way to make your non-variegated houseplant variegated. Can my variegated houseplant revert? Yes, it can. So if your plant is a non-stable variegated plant, then it can definitely revert. So always be on the lookout for your plants to revert. These will be plants that aren't found variegated in the wild, particularly common with Hoya, philodendron, etc. A lot of the aroids that are sold as variegated do not naturally occur as variegated in the wild, so it is important to keep an eye out for that. And usually you can find out by having a quick Google with the name of your plant and just say, is the variegation stable, or will my philodendron billeti variegated revert, for example. Can I get rid of variegation? Yes and no. Well, if your plant begins to revert and you prefer it that way, then you can take cuttings of your non-variegated section and propagate that, or you could just continue to let it grow as a non-variegated plant. If you have an unstable variegation or a white variegation, you can kind of encourage it to at least grow darker and less obvious by putting it in a very low light situation. Is that right? Yes. In a very low light situation, because what will happen is your plant will try to produce leaves with dark chloroplast filled, green pigment filled plant tissue to create as dark a leaf as possible in order to photosynthesize and receive and absorb as much light as possible from your light source. So if you have a very low minimal light source, then you could it's a bit risky because you don't really want to damage your plant or kill your plant by not giving it enough light. So I would just be very careful with that. I wouldn't necessarily try to do it unless I was doing it as an experiment. If you have any further questions about variegation, please do stick them in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give us a like and subscribe. I'm trying to do a bit more of the educational side of the videos rather than all the unboxings that I've been doing for months. So I hope this was helpful. If I have got anything incorrect and you are a botanist or a horticulturist and you're like, oh my god, what is this information, please do tell me in the comments, because I would hate to think that anything I've said is incorrect, although I have been researching this, so I hope that this is all correct. But as I say, please do let me know. Thank you so much for watching. Tell me all about your favourite variegated plants and how you've got on in cultivating your variegated plants. Have you let some of them revert? Do you snip off your reverted parts? Do you have any mutants like I have? I absolutely love the mutants, I've got to say. So please tell me about them if you got them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.